When my father died, he left my brother Derek the family's sprawling estate in Connecticut worth $3 million. All I got was our grandmother's tarnished silver ring that looked like it came from a cereal box. Everyone at the funeral kept telling me how sorry they were for my unfair inheritance. Little did they know, that worthless piece of jewelry would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The reading of Dad's will took place on a gray October morning. In Lawyer Henderson's mahogany-paneled office in downtown Hartford, Derek sat across from me, already measuring the mansion's rooms in his head, while I twisted the peculiar ring around my finger. It was an odd thing, a thick silver band with strange symbols carved around the edges, and a dull green stone that looked more like colored glass than any precious gem. Patricia, your father specifically requested that you receive your grandmother, Elena's ring, Mr. Henderson had said, his voice carrying that practiced sympathy lawyers use for awkward family moments. He mentioned it held special significance. Derek had actually laughed. Special significance? That old thing? Pat, I'll buy it from you for $50 if you want. Consider it charity. Not out of sentimentality, but because something about Dad's expression in his final weeks kept nagging at me. Whenever he'd catch me looking at the ring box on his nightstand, he'd get this secretive smile and say, Elena always said that ring would find its way to the right person when the time came. Now, 3 weeks after the funeral, I was sitting in my cramped studio apartment in New Haven, staring at the ring under my desk lamp. Derek had already moved into the mansion, posting photos on social media of himself lounging by the pool and hosting dinner parties in the grand dining room. Meanwhile, I was eating ramen noodles and trying to figure out how to pay next month's rent on my teacher's salary. The ring really was unremarkable. The silver had turned black in places, and the green stone had what looked like scratches across its surface. But those symbols around the band kept drawing my attention. They weren't like anything I'd seen before. Not quite letters, not quite pictures, but something in between. Some looked almost like animals. Others resembled geometric shapes. A few seemed to be combinations of both. I'd tried Googling antique silver ring symbols but got nothing useful. Most results showed expensive vintage jewelry that looked nothing like Grandma Elena's ring. I'd never really known my grandmother well. She'd died when I was 7. And Dad rarely talked about her except to mention she'd been eccentric and ahead of her time. On Saturday morning, I decided to take the ring to Marcus Goldstein, who ran an antique jewelry shop on Chapel Street. Marcus had been in business for 40 years and had a reputation for knowing the history behind every piece that came through his doors. His shop was cluttered with display cases full of Victorian brooches, Art Deco necklaces, and vintage watches, all carefully lit to show their best angles. Marcus was a thin man in his 70s with wire-rimmed glasses and gentle hands. That moved like a surgeon's when he examined jewelry. He took one look at the ring, and his eyebrows shot up. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice suddenly serious. "It was my grandmother's. She passed away about 20 years ago. Why?" Marcus pulled out a jeweler's loupe and studied the ring. More carefully, turning it slowly under his desk lamp. "These symbols," he murmured, "they're not decorative. They're functional." "Functional how?" "Your grandmother? What was her full name? Lena Marchetti? She was born in Italy, came to America in the 1940s. Marcus set the ring down and looked at me directly. "Miss, I think you need to do some research into your grandmother's background. This isn't just a ring, it's a cipher." "What do you mean?" "A cipher. The symbols correspond to a code. See how some of them repeat in specific patterns? And the way they're arranged around the band isn't random. It's sequential. Someone encoded information into this ring." My heart started beating faster. What kind of information? That's what you need to figure out. "But I can tell you this. Rings like this weren't made by regular jewelers. During World War II, certain groups used jewelry to hide important information. Messages, locations, names of people. Things that needed to be kept secret." I stared at the ring with new eyes. "You think my grandmother was involved in something during the war?" "I think your grandmother was more than just an immigrant looking for a better life. The craftsmanship on this ring, the complexity of the cipher, this was made by someone who knew exactly what they were doing." Marcus went to his computer and pulled up several websites. There are people who specialize in wartime codes and ciphers. Professor Sarah Chen at Yale studies resistance communication methods. If anyone can help you decode this, it's her. I left Marcus's shop with my mind spinning. The ring suddenly felt heavier on my finger, weighted with secrets I'd never imagined. Alina Marchetti, the quiet grandmother who'd made the best lasagna in Connecticut and always smelled like lavender soap, had apparently been carrying encoded secrets. That evening, I called Derek to ask what he remembered about Grandma Alina. Not much, he said, and I could hear the sounds of his housewarming party in the background. She was nice enough, I guess. Always gave us those weird Italian cookies when we visited. Why did Dad ever mention anything about her past, her life? Before she came to America, Derek paused. Now that you mention it, he did say something strange once. We were cleaning out her house after she died, and I found this old photo album. When I showed it to Dad, he got really quiet and said something like, "Alina never talked about those days, and neither should we." Then he took the album, and I never saw it again. What was in the photos? Just old pictures from Italy, I think. Black and white stuff from the 1940s. There was one of her with a group of people in front of some kind of building. But I couldn't make out much detail. She looked young, maybe in her 20s. After hanging up, I Googled Professor Sarah Chen and found her faculty page at Yale. She specialized in cryptography and resistance movements during World War II. Her research focused on how ordinary objects, jewelry, books, household items, had been used to hide crucial information during wartime. I sent her an email that night, attaching several high-resolution photos of the ring. I explained that it had belonged to my grandmother, an Italian immigrant, that an antique dealer had suggested it might contain encoded information. "Professor," Jen replied within hours. "Miss Torres, the symbols on your grandmother's ring match patterns we've seen in artifacts from the Italian resistance movement. Can you come to my office Monday morning? This could be historically significant." Sunday night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Alina, imagining her as a young woman in wartime Italy, encoding secrets into jewelry. What had she been hiding? And why had she never told anyone in the family about her past? The next morning, I drove to New Haven and found Professor Chen's office in the basement of the history department. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and an office lined, floor-toozling with books about codes, ciphers, and espionage. "Me see the ring," she said immediately. I handed it to her, and she examined it under a high-powered magnifying glass connected to her computer. The symbols appeared enlarged on her screen, and she began comparing them to charts and databases. "Credible," she whispered after several minutes. "Your grandmother was using a variation of the Alberti cipher, modified for three-dimensional encoding. See how the symbols wrap around the ring in a specific sequence? The position of each symbol relative to the stone creates additional layers of meaning. Can you decode it? It's going to take time. This is sophisticated work. Your grandmother wasn't just carrying messages. She was carrying a master key of some kind. The complexity suggests this contains multiple pieces of information, possibly locations or identities." Professor Chen looked up at me. "Ms. Torres, your grandmother may have been involved in some of the most dangerous resistance work of the war. People who carried information like this were risking their lives every day." I thought about Derek in his mansion, completely unaware that the real treasure had been sitting in a jewelry box all along, but this wasn't about money anymore. This was about understanding who Alina Marchetti really was and what secrets she'd carried to her grave. "How long will it take to crack the code?" I asked. "Give me a week. But Ms. Torres, you should prepare yourself. Whatever your grandmother hid in this ring, she had good reasons for keeping it secret. Are you sure you want to know the truth?" I looked at the ring, thinking about all the years it had sat forgotten in Dad's bedroom, and all the assumptions everyone had made about my worthless inheritance. "I'm sure," I said. "It's time to find out what Grandma Alina was really hiding." Week waiting for Professor Chen's results felt like a month. I found myself distracted at work, staring at my fourth-grade students, while my mind wandered to wartime Italy and secret codes. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was news about the ring. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. On Wednesday, I decided to do some digging of my own. I drove to the Connecticut State Library in Hartford, hoping to find immigration records for Alina Marchetti. The genealogy section was quieter than a tomb, filled with elderly researchers hunched over microfilm machines and dusty record books. The librarian, Mrs. Kim, helped me navigate the Ellis Island database. We found Elena's entry record from September 1947. She'd arrived on a ship called the Marine Falcon, traveling alone at age 26. Her occupation was listed as seamstress, and her sponsor was listed as St. Anthony's Catholic Church, New Haven. That's unusual, Mrs. Kim noted, adjusting her reading glasses. Most immigrants were sponsored by family members or employers. Churches typically only sponsored refugees or people fleeing persecution. What would make someone a refugee in 1947? Italy was in chaos after the war. Displaced persons, people whose homes had been destroyed. Those who'd been involved in resistance activities and feared retaliation. The records are often vague about specific circumstances. I asked to see any other documents connected to Elena's name. Mrs. Kim disappeared into the archives and returned with a thin folder containing naturalization papers from 1952. Alina had officially become an American citizen. But there was an interesting note in the margin: applicant's previous documentation destroyed during wartime activities. Testimony provided by Father Antonio Rossi, St. Anthony's Church. Ain't Father Rossi? I wrote down the name, wondering if the church might have more records that afternoon. I drove to New Haven and found St. Anthony's Church nestled between two apartment buildings on Wooster Street. The current priest, Father Martinez, was a young man who looked barely older than my students. He greeted me in the parish office, surrounded by filing cabinets that looked like they hadn't been organized since the 1960s. Father Rossi died in 1978, he explained when I asked about Elena's sponsor. But we do have some of his personal papers in storage. He was very involved with helping Italian refugees after the war. Let me see what I can find. 20 minutes later, Father Martinez emerged from the basement carrying a cardboard box labeled a Rossi Personal Files. Inside were dozens of letters, immigration forms, and handwritten notes in Italian and English. Here, he said, pulling out a manila envelope marked E. Marchetti. Father Rossi kept detailed records of everyone he helped. The envelope contained a letter written in English, dated October 1947. Alina arrived with no possessions except the clothes on her back and a silver ring she refuses to remove. She speaks excellent English, but will not discuss her life in Italy. Beyond saying she helped people during the difficult times, Dr. Benedetti from the Italian Relief Committee says she bears the markings of someone who endured significant hardship. She has nightmares and startles at sudden noises. Whatever she experienced, it was traumatic. I have arranged work for her at Moretti's tailoring shop. She is skilled with her hands and works without complaint. I believe she will make a good American citizen, though I suspect she carries secrets she may never share. My hands trembled as I read. Alina had been traumatized, possibly tortured. And Father Rossi had noticed the ring specifically refuses to remove, suggested it was more than just jewelry to her. Father, can I make copies of these documents? Of course. Alina was before my time, but Father Rossi's notes suggest she was special. He didn't write this much detail about most refugees. I spent another hour going through the files. There were receipts for clothes and household items purchased for Alina, notes about English lessons at the church, and a reference letter written for her employer. But the most interesting document was a small piece of paper with Italian words written in Father Rossi's handwriting. Partigiana, Gruppo Stella, Operation Bernardo. I didn't speak Italian, but I recognized operation as operation. When I got home, I used Google Translate, Partisan Star Group, Operation Bernard. Alina had been a partisan, a member of the Italian resistance. My phone rang just as I was processing this revelation. Professor Chen's name appeared on the screen. Ms. Torres, can you come to my office immediately? I've made a breakthrough with the ring. I drove to Yale in record time, my heart pounding with anticipation. Professor Chen was waiting in her office with several computer printouts spread across her desk. Your grandmother was extraordinary, she began without preamble. The cipher on this ring contains three separate pieces of information, encoded using techniques I've never seen combined before. She pointed to her computer screen, which showed the ring symbols arranged in different patterns. First, there's a list of names, 12 people, encoded using the position of symbols relative to the central stone. Second, there are geographic coordinates hidden in the sequence of repeated symbols around the band. And third, most remarkably, there's a date and time. What do they say? Professor Chen handed me a printed sheet. The names are Italian, both first and last names. Coordinates point to a location in the mountains outside Florence, Italy. And the date is April 18th, 1945. I stared at the information, trying to make sense of it. What happened on April 18th, 1945? That was just days before the German surrender in Italy. The resistance groups were conducting final operations to secure important documents and protect people who'd collaborated with the Allies. Professor Chen pulled up a map on her computer and zoomed in on the coordinates. This location is near a small village called Montecroce, about 30 kilometers from SHN, Florence. During the war, this area was controlled by a resistance group called Gruppo Stella. Star Group, I whispered, remembering Father Rossi's note. Have you heard of them? I told her about the church records and Father Rossi's notation about Alina being a partisan with Gruppo Stella and something called Operation Bernardo. Professor Chen's eyes widened. Operation Bernard. I've read about this in classified OSS documents that were declassified in the 90s. It was a joint operation between Italian partisans and American intelligence officers to secure Nazi documentation about war criminals and stolen art. The operation was supposed to happen in April 1945, but the records indicated it failed and several partisans were captured. You think Alina was involved? I think Alina was more than involved. Look at this ring again. This isn't just any partisan's cipher. This is a master list. The names, the coordinates, the exact date and time. Someone trusted her with the most critical information of the operation. Professor Chen leaned back in her chair. Ms. Torres, your grandmother was likely a key intelligence operative. The trauma, Father Rossi noted. The fact that she fled Italy with nothing but this ring. Sophisticated encoding. She was probably the sole survivor of Operation Bernard. The room felt like it was spinning. Lena, who'd made lasagna and knitted sweaters and worked quietly in a tailor shop, had been a spy. She'd carried the secrets of a failed resistance operation for over 50 years, encoded in a ring that everyone assumed was worthless. But why didn't she ever tell anyone? Why keep it a secret her whole life? Because the operation failed, which means someone betrayed it. Even decades later, Alina couldn't be sure who might still be alive, who might still be dangerous. She protected herself and her family by staying silent. Professor Chen gathered the papers. There's something else. The coordinates point to a specific building, an old monastery that was used as a safe house during the war. If Operation Bernard was about securing documents or artwork, that location might still hold whatever they were trying to protect. Looked at the ring on my finger with new understanding. Alina hadn't just carried information, she'd carried responsibility. For over 50 years, she'd been the only person who knew where to find whatever Gruppo Stella had been trying to save. What do you think is still there? Only one way to find out. Ms. Torres, you need to go to Italy. I nearly laughed. I can't afford a trip to Italy. I can barely afford groceries. This could be historically significant. There are grants foundations that fund this kind of research. Give me a few days to make some calls. Falena's information leads to a major discovery. War documents, stolen art. Evidence of war crimes that could change our understanding of the Italian resistance. As I drove home that night, I kept thinking about Alina living with these secrets, never knowing if she'd made the right choice to stay silent. She'd given up her past, her country, probably people she loved, to protect information that might still matter. Derek called while I was eating dinner. Pat, I've been thinking about that ring. A few people at my party were asking about family heirlooms. If you want to sell it, I know a guy who deals in estate jewelry. He'd probably give you a few hundred for it. Actually, Derek, I think I'm going to keep it. Your choice. Hey, did you know Dad had a safety deposit box? The bank just contacted me about it. Apparently there are some old family documents in there. Want to come with me to check it out next week? My pulse quickened. Dad had a safety deposit box? Yeah, at First National on Elm Street. He never mentioned it to you? I wondered what else Dad had kept secret about Elena's past. I'll meet you there. After hanging up, I stared at the ring, thinking about the monastery in the mountains outside. Florence and whatever secrets might still be waiting there. Lena had protected this information for 50 years, and now it was my responsibility. I just had to figure out what to do with it. The safety deposit box at First National Bank was smaller than a shoebox, but it changed everything. Derek and I sat in the sterile viewing room while the bank manager left us alone with Dad's final secrets. Inside were Elena's naturalization papers, which I'd already seen at the church, but underneath was a leather portfolio I'd never encountered. Derek opened it to reveal dozens of photographs, documents in Italian, and a letter addressed to my granddaughter Patricia in Dad's careful handwriting. Why did he write this to you specifically? Derek asked, frowning. I opened the letter with trembling hands. Patricia, if you're reading this, then the ring has already started revealing its secrets. I always suspected you'd be the one to pursue the truth. You have Elena's curiosity and stubbornness. Your grandmother made me promise never to tell anyone about her past while she was alive. But she also made me promise to help whoever inherited the ring understand its importance. Elena wasn't just a seamstress. She was Stella Marchetti, the code name for one of the most effective partisan intelligence operators in Tuscany. The ring contains the location of documents that could identify dozens of Nazi collaborators who escaped justice after the war. But it also contains something else. The location of a cache of Renaissance artwork stolen from Jewish families and hidden by the SS before the German retreat. 3 months before Elena died. She told me she'd been having dreams about the monastery. At Montecros. She said the dreams felt like messages, like she was being called to finish what Operation Bernard started. She was too old and sick to make the journey. But she believed someone from our family would eventually complete her mission. Money in account number 4,729 at Hartford Savings, enough for travel expenses and more. Elena saved every penny she could for 60 years, hoping someone would eventually follow the ring's clues. She called it her debt to history. The photographs in this portfolio showed the people she worked with in the resistance. Some may still be alive. If you decide to go to Italy, start with Dr. Marco Benedetti in Florence. He's the grandson of the doctor who helped Elena escape. His grandfather left detailed records. Your grandmother carried enormous guilt for surviving when so many others didn't. She never felt she deserved a peaceful life in America while justice remained undone. Maybe you can give her the peace she never found. I'm proud of you for asking the right questions. Elena would be too. Love, Dad. Derek whistled low. There's really money for this? I was already studying the photographs. Young faces in black and white. People who'd risked everything to fight fascism. In one photo, I recognized Elena immediately. She couldn't have been more than 25. Standing with a group of men and women in front of a stone building that looked like a church or monastery. Their dad left me money to finish Elena's work. And you're actually thinking about going to Italy? Pat, this is crazy. These people are all dead. Whatever happened 70 years ago doesn't matter now. But it did matter. I could feel Elena's unfinished business like a weight in my chest. Professor. Chen was ecstatic when I showed her the portfolio. She immediately contacted Dr. Marco Benedetti, who confirmed he had extensive records about Gruppo Stella and Operation Bernard. Within a week, she'd secured funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities for a historical recovery expedition. To Italy, 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to Florence. Carrying Elena's ring and her secrets across the ocean, she'd crossed as a refugee. Dr. Benedetti met me at the Florence airport, a distinguished man in his 70s with kind eyes and perfect English. During the drive to his office, he told me his grandfather's story. I know Giuseppe treated many partisans during the war, but he always said Elena was special. Not just brave, but brilliant. She could memorize complex information instantly and move through enemy territory like a ghost. When Operation Bernard was betrayed, she was the only one who escaped the Nazi trap. His office was filled with wartime artifacts and documentation. He pulled out a thick folder labeled Stella Marchetti, Gruppo Stella, your grandmother. I was supposed to retrieve a cache of documents and artwork hidden at the monastery of San Lorenzo near Monte Croce. The operation was scheduled for April 18, 1945, but German forces arrived first. Elena watched from hiding as her companions were captured. She carried the guilt of their sacrifice for the rest of her life. He showed me detailed maps of the monastery grounds. The cache was hidden in the monastery's old wine cellar, behind a false wall marked with the same symbols found on Elena's ring. After the war, the monastery was abandoned. It's been empty for decades. The next morning, we drove into the Tuscan hills. The countryside was beautiful, rolling green hills dotted with cypress trees and stone farmhouses. But as we climbed higher into the mountains, the landscape became wilder and more remote. The monastery of San Lorenzo sat on a hilltop overlooking a valley, its stone walls weathered but intact. The local authorities had given us permission to explore, understanding the historical significance of our mission. Inside the monastery was eerily quiet. Sunlight streamed through broken stained glass windows, illuminating empty rooms where monks had once lived and worked. Dr. Benedetti led me to a stone staircase that descended into darkness. The wine cellar was exactly as the documents described, a long vaulted room with stone walls and alcoves that had once held wine barrels. Using the ring's encoded measurements, we located the specific wall section Elena had marked. Dr. Benedetti ran his hands along the stones until he found what? We were looking for the same symbols from the ring, carved faintly into the mortar between two large blocks. Here, he said, his voice echoing in the cellar. Behind the false wall, we found them. Metal document cases wrapped in waxed cloth, still intact after nearly 80 years. And beside them, wooden crates containing paintings, Renaissance masterpieces, stolen from Jewish families and hidden by fleeing Nazis. The documents were devastating. Lists of Nazi collaborators, evidence of war crimes, financial records showing how stolen wealth had been distributed, names of people who'd escaped justice and built new lives in South America and other countries. But the artwork was miraculous. Paintings by masters whose works had been considered lost forever. Each piece had documentation showing its original Jewish owners, families who'd been murdered in the Holocaust, their cultural treasures stolen, and hidden. Dr. Benedetti was crying as we photographed everything. Elena succeeded. After all these years, she succeeded. We spent 3 days cataloging the discovery. The Italian government immediately began proceedings to return the artwork to surviving family members or museums. The war crimes documentation was turned over to international justice organizations, though most of the perpetrators were long dead. But the real treasure was something I found in the last document case, a letter written by Elena in 1945, addressed to whoever finds this cache. My name is Elena Marchetti, codename Stella, of Gruppo Stella Resistance. If you are reading this, then Operation Bernard has been completed and justice has been served. I pray that whoever finds these items will ensure they reach their rightful owners or serve the cause of historical truth. I have encoded the location of this cache in a silver ring, which I will carry to safety. If I do not survive to return these items, I trust that fate will guide the right person to this place. To my family, if any survive, I did what I could to fight evil in this world. I hope you can forgive me for the secrets I kept and understand that some truths are too dangerous to share until the time is right. May these items serve memory and justice, Elena Marchetti. April 20th, 1945, I returned to Connecticut with something more valuable than any inheritance Derek could have imagined. The Italian government offered me a reward for the recovery of the stolen artwork, but I declined. Elena hadn't hidden those treasures for profit. Instead, established the Elena Marchetti Foundation for Holocaust Education using Dad's savings and donations from grateful families whose stolen artwork had been recovered. Derek, humbled by the magnitude of Elena's legacy, became the foundation's first major donor. The ring now sits in a place of honor in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Along with Elena's story and the documentation of her courage, Visitors can read about the ordinary seamstress from New Haven, who carried extraordinary secrets in the granddaughter, who finally brought them to light. Sometimes I wonder what Derek thinks about our respective inheritances now. He got a mansion worth $3 million? I got a ring that helped recover priceless stolen art, brought closure to Holocaust survivors' families, and revealed the truth about one of history's unsung heroes. Alina was right. The ring did find its way to the right person when the time came. And Dad was right too. I did have Elena's stubbornness and curiosity, and that made all the difference. The worthless ring had been worth everything. It just took 70 years for the world to understand its true value. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.